Hello and welcome to House Read, my Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire theorising channel, where I take a look at the books in the show from the perspective of a writer and use the techniques of the craft to see if I can make predictions and gain a deeper understanding of what's happening now and what will happen. Recently, a commenter on one of my videos asked the question about whether or not Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire was apocalyptic fiction. And I found that an extremely interesting question, because apocalyptic fiction is not just a story where the world ends. Of course, it includes that as well, but apocalyptic fiction generally is a whole genre with a specific story structure. So my idea for this video is to take a look at that story structure and see if it can be compared to Game of Thrones' story structure, and whether this would be able to tell us anything about the way that Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire might end. Where does traditional apocalyptic fiction begin? It usually begins with a single character who has an understanding of the coming apocalypse, a prophecy, if you will, that he or she attempts to share with others. Let's take a look at this clip from the film 2012 as an example of this.
Mr. Anheuser, I need to talk to you. Do I know you? Sorry, sir. My name is Dr. Adrian Helmsley. I'm a deputy geologist at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Excuse me, fellas. Absolutely. You know that this is a fundraiser, not a frat party, right? It's extremely important, sir. You know what? It always is. Here's what I want you to do. Make an appointment with my... even better, have your boss bring it up at the quarterly science briefing, okay? There's a good plan. I just traveled 20 straight hours to get here, sir. I haven't slept in 2 days. You need to read this, sir. You need to read it now. Let me guess. National geology crisis? Excuse me.
This type of sequence in fiction is often referred to as the Cassandra complex. Let's take a listen to a clip from another apocalyptic fiction film, 12 Monkeys, where they explain what the Cassandra complex is.
And one of the four beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, who liveth forever and ever. Revelations. In the 14th century, according to the accounts of local officials of that time, this man appeared suddenly in the village of Weil near Stonehenge in April of 1362. Using unfamiliar words and speaking in a strange accent, the man made dire prognostications about a pestilence which he said would wipe out humanity in approximately 600 years. Obviously, this plague doomsday scenario is considerably more compelling when reality supports it with a virulent disease, whether it's the bubonic plague, smallpox, or AIDS. And now we have technological horrors as well, such as chemical warfare, which first reared its ugly head during the deadly mustard gas attacks of World War I. During such an attack in the French trenches in October of 1917, we have an account of this soldier, who during the assault was wounded by shrapnel and hospitalized, apparently in a state of hysteria. Doctors found that he had lost all comprehension of French, but that he spoke English fluently, albeit in regional dialect they didn't recognize. The man, though physically unaffected by the gas, was beside himself. He claimed that he had come from the future, that he was looking for a pure germ that would ultimately wipe mankind off the face of the earth starting in the year 1996. Though injured, the young soldier disappeared from the hospital, no doubt trying to carry on his mission to warn others and substituting for the agony of war a self-inflicted agony we call the Cassandra complex. Cassandra, in Greek legend, you recall, was condemned to know the future, but to be disbelieved when she foretold it. Hence, the agony of foreknowledge combined with the impotence to do anything about it.
So the Cassandra complex is basically a character in fiction or in real life who believes they have the knowledge of a coming apocalypse, but nobody around them will listen to it. You will find this form of character at the beginning of every single apocalyptic fiction thing that you can find, book, film, or anything. It's a classic trope of the genre that has almost become a necessity. So in order for Game of Thrones to be considered apocalyptic fiction, I think it should also include this kind of situation.
You bring minelings here, through our gates.
Men, women, and children will die by the thousands if we do nothing.
Let them die. We got our own to worry about. Less enemies for us.
There is good farmland in the gift. Land that no one uses now. A dozen abandoned villages.
And why do you think the farmers abandoned those villages? Because the wildlings raided them for years. Cut them down. Just like they did this boy's people.
We've been fighting them for thousands of years. They've slaughtered villages. They've slaughtered our brothers.
And we've slaughtered theirs.
I will follow you anywhere. You know that. But they killed Gren. And they killed Pip. They killed 50 of our brothers. I can't forget that. I can't forgive it.
You were at the fist of the first men. If we abandon them, you know what they become. We can learn to live with the wildlings, or we can add them to the army of the dead. Whatever they are now, they're better than that.
In a similar way to all of the other apocalyptic fiction stories, Jon Snow could, at a stretch, be considered to be this Cassandra-like character. He appears to be one of the very few characters who takes the White Walker army seriously as a genuine threat, and seems to spend most of his time going around trying to convince others of it, with extremely limited success. On this first point, it would seem almost cut and dry that Game of Thrones is apocalyptic fiction. However, this is so far, after reviewing the plot lines of various characters again and again, it's so far the only piece of evidence, really, that Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire fits this genre. If any of my listeners have any more evidence to support this idea, then please let me know about it in the comments below. But just because there is at the moment an absence of evidence, it doesn't mean that's evidence of absence. It could be that Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire is in fact apocalypse fiction, but we're just in the early stages of it. So if it is, what can we expect to see next?
Time's up.
In every single piece of apocalyptic fiction, what happens next is the destruction of pretty much everything. This is largely unavoidable in apocalyptic fiction. You get it in War of the Worlds, you get it in 2012, you get it in 12 Monkeys, you get it in The Day After Tomorrow. I can't think of a single apocalyptic fiction story where the apocalypse was actually prevented. So if Game of Thrones is part of this genre, what you'd expect to see is the White Walkers, in a sense, being successful, destroying the Watch and ploughing through the entirety of Westeros, murdering and destroying everything in their path. But it's not all doom and gloom, because if it is apocalypse fiction, usually they have a very similar end, and that end occurs after the near destruction of near everything. Something happens like this.
From the moment the invaders arrived, breathed our air, ate and drank, they were doomed. They were undone, destroyed, after all of man's weapons and devices had failed, by the tiniest creatures that God in his wisdom put upon this earth. By the toll of 1 billion deaths, man had earned his immunity, his right to survive among this planet's infinite organisms. And that right is ours against all challenges, for neither do men live nor die in vain.
A deus ex machina, which means something that was not chosen by the characters, something that none of the characters could have affected, but in a sense the apocalypse just kind of peters out and leaves people in a state of catharsis where they have an opportunity to rebuild society in the way that they think that it should be built.
Richard Norris, on behalf of my parents who couldn't be here today, for saving the world from the Martians, proudly present to you the Medal of Honor.
You don't have to kiss me if you don't want to.
I have to.
I prepared a speech, is that alright?
Sure, that's very appropriate.
Hi, everybody. First, I just want to say that... Well, I wanted to say that there's a lot of people in the world that, like, done a lot more than I have, and they're the ones that should be here now, getting a medal. And I want to thank my grandma for always being so good to me and for helping save the world and everything. So I guess, like, now we just have to start over and start rebuilding everything, like our houses. But I was thinking maybe instead of houses we could live in teepees, because it's better in a lot of ways. I guess that's all I have to say. Thanks.
This isn't really a bold prediction, because I'm still very much on the fence as to whether Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire is apocalyptic fiction. But if it is, my bold prediction is this: that the White Walkers will successfully invade Westeros, will largely destroy most of the known world, and then will just sort of peter out for some reason, perhaps an environmental change or something that is not controlled by any of the characters, and then it will leave a few of probably only the nice characters after this sort of cathartic purge, and they will rebuild the world, or at least see the beginnings of them rebuilding the world in the way that they think that it should be structured. So, if you like this video, click like, and if you really liked it, why not subscribe for more?